Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it's time for another news roundup episode. I'm joined once again by our assistant editor, Eamon McCarthy-Earls. Eamon, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be here, and certainly we've had a lot of really interesting news over the past month and several days or whatever it's been since our last podcast, so very interested to discuss it with you.
Yeah, plenty to catch up on, and we'll be selective here. I want to kind of pick and choose from the things that I think our readers had the most interest in and where we saw kind of the most discussion. So let's get into it. What do we have first?
Well, I know one of the big things lately has been a lot of the sort of April 2019 releases for Dynamics 365 Business Central, which you certainly have been covering, and I've been doing some coverage on as well.
That's true, and really, for me, the news on Business Central has really come in this month of April. That's partly because, obviously, like you said, the release wave begins again in April, and Microsoft sort of ramped up its messaging at the same time, which I guess is to be expected. That really did start with kind of under the cover or under the radar, I guess I should say, with a conference in Kuala Lumpur, the Directions Asia event, which is a partner-only event, and it's really focused on Nav and now Business Central. And Microsoft really brought quite a few of the leadership team for Business Central there to talk about the future. They talked about really with no kind of accompanying announcements or anything for the public, but we were able to glean quite a bit out of what came out of social media, mostly Twitter, I would say, and then ongoing discussions from bloggers after that. The other point I would just make is I think is a piece we ran, which included an interview with Errol Schoenfish, who's the director of product marketing at Microsoft and works very closely with Business Central. And he told us that in Microsoft's view, Business Central is growing at a rate that exceeded Microsoft's expectations. Now, we don't know exactly what those were and what those numbers are, but it certainly sounds like it's a progress it's a product that's making the kind of progress the company wanted to see from it, and that progress is primarily, at least until now, with new customer additions as opposed to sort of migrating the 200,000 or a little under perhaps customers of Dynamics GP, Nav, and SL. But those are probably the ones that are coming into focus with more, more focus, more concentration, more urgency in the next year or two. Now that I think the product is getting stronger, the partner channel capacity is getting higher. I say these things, it sounds a little bit like the same sort of cloud on-prem to cloud ERP upgrade conversation I've been having about AX to finance and operations. It's starting to sound a little bit like that. Not exactly the same, of course, but that is really where Microsoft, I think, is focusing when it comes to Business Central, getting partners excited about the progress, getting them, making sure that everyone knows that Microsoft is very optimistic about Business Central, and trying to sort of, I guess, keep that momentum going into the spring and summer here, with making hay out of the progress they've already made with the product in the last couple of releases.
Did Schoenfish give a sense of when he thinks that some of the GP and Nav focus partners will begin sort of retooling their customers for Business Central?
Well, I mean, in terms of working in terms of what partners I think are going to do individually on a customer by customer basis, he was actually very, very careful not to to explain that Microsoft does not have a one-size-fits-all strategy on that. He understands. I mean, Errol Schoenfish has worked in the GP channel and now the sort of the broader SMB Dynamics channel now for many years, and he knows GP partners especially very, very well, and knows that they're not going to push customers into Business Central. At least the veteran ones won't, unless they're ready, and many won't be ready for this year or even next year or beyond. So I think and I think I even mentioned this in one of my pieces, that it's a multi multi-pronged strategy of supporting customers to stay on, let's say, GP or SL because it is a supported product. Sort of what they're calling midterm, which is which is the idea that like some of them might want to be connected to Business Central through this sort of cloud connector thing, where you pay a low monthly per user fee and you get your GP or your on-prem data, GP, NAV, or SL, sort of replicated into this cloud ERP environment. And I think that's still in the very early days. I don't think many customers have really tried that yet or bothered with it. But I think that might become more interesting, or maybe not. We'll have to see. And then there's the ones who are ready to go to the cloud. And so I think Microsoft's trying to. Obviously, they want those second two scenarios to become, the most attractive. But partners are probably going to play this, however they think is best for each individual client, depending on the ones who really are interested and the ones who just want to stay put.
You also had a chance recently to garner some partner insights at Extreme 365. I noticed a few interesting stats that came out of that from one of the announcements or one of the talks you had a chance to attend, which indicated that there are 6,000 partners now selling Dynamics 365, up from 3,500 in fiscal year 2017, and also 2,500 selling Power Platform in the form of Flow, Power BI, and Power Apps. What were some of the other insights you saw during Extreme 365?
I think those stats were useful to hear about. That kind of growth. I mean, I think Microsoft considers those pretty big numbers to be adding, almost 100%, growth in Dynamics 365 partners and thousands of Power Platform partners. That's a lot of partners to service as a channel company, as Microsoft is. So they have their hands full with, I think, trying to manage that many partners, and there's probably a lot more to come in terms of what they're going to do to actually sort of manage and offer programs to those companies. I guess the other stat that jumps out to me is the 30% growth in deals over $1 million in the Dynamics 365 space. Having more deals above that sort of price point, which isn't. I don't think that price point really has any real significance. It's just it's a nice big round number, right? It says something. It doesn't necessarily say anything about the average deal size or the median deal size. So like where's the middle ground in it? But with bigger GSIs coming into the channel or getting involved with selling D365 solutions, I think it's a sign that those companies are incorporating it into their clients' deals more than they were before. So probably good news, even if you can't draw necessarily too many conclusions for that metric of growth in $1 million deals.
I suppose to an extent that may skew the results a little bit as well. There may be a lot of under $1 million deals, a great many of them, but
sure,
because those high value ones, which are certainly indicative of something, but they may skew the overall total in some respects.
Yeah, there's a lot in flux there. I mean, just in particular, I think when you look at the ERPs in particular, I've heard it stated several times now that Business Central started off in the 4 to 10 seat deal was kind of very typical. And so that would be, I'm not sure exactly how much that would be in licenses, but, thousands of dollars, not tens or hundreds of thousands. And then, over time that has grown, and the average seat size, I'm sure has grown in the last year or even in the last 6 months as the product is more mature and they can sort of justify it to bigger teams, bigger companies. Same with AI, same with finance and operations. I think it started with, maybe not single digit deals, but, in the tens, dozens of seats, and now it's probably much more likely to be seeing 150, 300, or bigger deals that weren't being maybe sold in its first couple of years. So I think these numbers are really changing as time goes on and as the products evolve and as the partners who sell them kind of evolve their approach too.
But I'm sure in a lot of ways it must come down to winning over some more enterprise customers that maybe weren't the first to jump but wanted to see others take the leap. And I imagine that Business Central must be interesting as well, because clearly it's been geared toward smaller businesses all along, but there's that sort of uncanny position of many small and medium enterprises where they could really kind of go either way, whether it's finance and operations or Business Central. And I'm sure some partners have been able to make the case for going the Business Central route. So I imagine there must be some interesting deals forged for sort of mid-tier companies. Certainly on the topic of, go ahead, sorry, Jason.
I would think so. I would agree with you. I haven't seen a by the number by number price breakdown, but there's a big step up when you move to finance and operations, and those companies at the 100 seat, companies looking to maybe get 100 users onto an ERP. They've got to be looking closely at both 100, even 100. I heard one partner mention, up to 150 users tends to still be a good case for Business Central in some scenarios, and 150 users on Business Central, I think, is a very different prospect than 150 users on finance and operations in terms of what it'll cost, over several years.
Another thing we've seen recently with Business Central is some updates to the UI and development model. And I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts about that. That's obviously another aspect of the April 2019 release wave that may be a little more visible to many users of the software.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic where, there's a side of it that users will certainly see. They'll certainly notice or be told about the new UI, the modern client interface that's moving forward, and then also, I guess, the way that can be customized or added to with extensions or with customizations in the new sort of Business Central technology stack. But what's also interesting is on the other side, what customers probably will never see is this very heated debate right now, spirited, maybe you would call it spirited debate, among sort of this veteran core of Dynamics Nav developers who are trying to sort of work out among themselves what the right approach is for customization for Business Central. And there seem to be, I can't summarize it all right now, but there's sort of team extensions, which is like the team that is all about, let's just focus on developing extensions, which are sort of the cloud, the only way you can develop in the SaaS version of Business Central, and a way you can also develop on-prem. And then there's just writing code in the AL, in AL, to just customize the interface, which you can do on-prem still, and whether that's still acceptable or not. And some very experienced, smart developers are very comfortable with that, and others are saying, I'm never going to do that again. It's either extensions or nothing. Again, it's a great conversation to read it, to sort of hear everyone's voices are about, because these are very opinionated developers. They have, years of sort of technical knowledge that go into their sort of views on this. But on the other hand, it's so sort of such inside baseball, and I think back to like whether customers, either care or will be impacted. I mean, I guess they could be impacted if the wrong type of customization ends up biting them, 5 years down the road when it is no longer supported or supportable, or that kind of thing. So, and then Microsoft, I think threw a little bit of a sort of a wild card into the whole debate when they sort of stated on this one slide that in the future, all customization will follow sort of the cloud model, but that's kind of a vague statement, so people weren't sure what that even meant. So anyway, it's a fascinating time, and it'll be really interesting to see how Microsoft sort of helps guide these developers as time goes on, because they're making decisions right now about what to do about their add-on solutions that they bring to market that are sort of packaged, and also what they recommend to customers in terms of customization. So it's not just a theoretical conversation. There's definite real customer impact on it in the long run.
We've also seen some interesting discussion about Business Central in context of Directions North America. And it really seems like there's quite a variety of partner interest kind of in regard to Business Central.
Yeah, so that's coming up shortly, I think in a little under 2 weeks. And that's, a much bigger follow-up to that Directions Asia event. And this one's interesting. I think one sign of the sort of the interest the customer the partners have. This is a partner event, and they were just at a Directions North America event 7 months ago. They've changed the cadence of the event. It went from a fall event to now switching over to a spring event. That's why it's happening so soon after the previous one. And it'll continue in 12 months as a spring event again. But they were thinking they might have a drop off because people had just been. But they're seeing strong attendance because, and it makes sense. I mean, with these every 6 month updates or so, people are paying attention more frequently to understand how the product is evolving, how it's advancing, and how Microsoft's approach to it is changing. So yeah, I think it'll be a busy and well attended event in Las Vegas in the very beginning of May.
Another thing we've heard about, which is kind of Business Central related, but honestly veers off more into sort of a business applications aspect of things, is sort of some new co-sell and co-marketing options for ISVs. You had a chance to speak with Stephen Guggenheimer about that. What did he have to say?
I didn't speak with him. I was taking a cue from. I got a little bit of a recommendation that I watched his blog for updates, and sure enough, he posted an article explaining this new model. It's a co-sell and co-marketing option that Dynamics and Power Platform ISVs can use, where they can go to market together with Microsoft sellers, and Microsoft sellers will help sell and market their solutions in return for a cut of the profits or a cut of the revenue, I guess, of making that deal. It's a program that's brand new. I think it's opt-in, although I think the language that Gugs used wasn't super clear on that, whether it's for everybody or just for opting in. But I think it's the kind of program from a contact I did talk to it about it, that it'll maybe start slowly, it'll ramp up, and it's the kind of thing that will be adjusted over time to get whatever optimal performance Microsoft can get out of it to encourage Microsoft sellers to sell ISV products and get ISVs excited that it's worth their time to pay out the 10 or 20% to Microsoft in return for their efforts. So it's early days. It doesn't even start till the beginning of the new fiscal year, and there's going to be I know a range of webcasts and presentations trying to break down the way this will work, the nuts and bolts of it, and so forth. So still a lot to be seen in how well that rolls out. But I think Microsoft's pretty committed to it.
One of the things I noticed from my perspective with a joint focus on Dynamics and Azure is a lot of recent stuff from Microsoft focused on really getting nonprofit organizations using Azure, much like they already use many of the Office 365 products. But we also have seen that for Dynamics 365 with the Non-Profit Accelerator, particularly the second version, which launched in November 2018. And evidently, it's doubled the size of its common data model entity set from 35 to 75, and nearly tripled its network of partners from 14 to 40 so far. Jason, you wrote a little bit more about this. Can you give me a sense of where the Nonprofit Accelerator is heading for nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great. I think the Nonprofit Accelerator itself is a really interesting product. It's also a really interesting way in which Microsoft is sort of trying to build its nonprofit vertical, I hate to call it an industry, but sort of vertical specialization by partnering with a lot of outside firms, both software vendors and philanthropic organizations, because it's a very and talk. I had a chance to speak once again with Eric Arnold, who's the CTO for Microsoft's Tech for Social Impact organization. It's actually part of Microsoft Philanthropy, so it's kind of a unique situation compared to other industry segments at Microsoft. But I mean, I think the approach is largely the same, trying to build consensus over a common data model that is meaningful to the industry. So I think that, like you said, the growth of the number of entities in the nonprofit specific common data model is significant. And I think some of the other priorities that they are taking with the project is also indicative of that. There's new support for sort of industry standards for transparency, which is obviously pretty interesting. And I mean, even like inter-organization spending on the same goal. So if one foundation is funding the purchase of medical devices to be used on site at a disaster zone, for example, by another organization, there are ways now that that funding can be tracked in terms of its donation to the first organization, over the devices being delivered to the second organization, and their sort of final purchase and deployment on site to the people, the beneficiaries, I guess you call them. Those kinds of sort of a lower level sort of use cases are becoming part of this, and to me anyway, I think this has got to be one of the really ideal sort of approaches that I think Microsoft would hope to mirror in other industry settings, whether it's even in for-profit areas, getting consensus from a lot of important players in the space, and making the common data model for those for that industry really work for the players, so that they actually are encouraged to use it, that they're buying into not just sort of getting their name on a slide, but adapting their own software. I think a lot of these companies have adapted software to be compatible with a common data model, so that their data, can flow in and out of it as needed. And then also getting service providers who work in that space to, embrace it, and hopefully, I guess, use it to either build their own solutions or deploy Microsoft solutions, which are based on D365, or other ones that just work with it. Again, I think that it's all a benefit for Microsoft, and I think especially with Tech for Social Impact and the Non-Profit Accelerator. I mean, it's also just a great story when you sort of look at some of the results in the nonprofit sector that they're trying to achieve. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting one, and I guess a good sort of example to hold up of the types of things that you might see in other industry areas as it relates to biz apps.
Well, certainly in addition to our extensive news coverage, not all of which we touched on today from the past month, we've also been very lucky, as always, to have expert contributors write some really interesting articles for us. One that I'll just start off with, because of its Business Central focus, is actually a recent one we just published the other day, part of our Finance Where I'm From series. In this case, it's Accounting in Australia by Charmaine De Silva. And it took a very interesting look at electronic funds transfer and business activity statement lodgement processes using Business Central. Obviously, I can't summarize it all and all of the Australian Banking Authority tie-ins and Australian tax tie-ins, but I recommend it to anyone that is thinking of doing business in Australia or may already do business there.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think I always find it really interesting to see how what it takes to make a solution work in the sort of typical operations within a country, and I think this really answers that for this country and this product. So it was great to see, and I think that's the third in the series, or maybe the fourth.
I believe at this point about the fourth we've had.
All right, great. And yeah, hopefully we'll see more of those in the future, different countries, different products. So yeah, pretty interesting.
We also had some interesting perspective from Harald Horgen, looking at sort of what SaaS companies need to know about the risks of holding data. He argues that essentially the traditional model was throw out your data, but nowadays it's the sort of new philosophy is collect and keep as much as you can for as long as you can, in case you can find some kind of way to monetize it eventually. And as a result, people are setting up all these data warehouses and repositories of third-party data. They do, however, have to understand all of the changing compliance requirements. So he recommends things like cybersecurity risk insurance and just a general understanding of compliance with the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe or the Patriot Act in the U.S.
Yeah, there's a huge number of factors to balance, because companies obviously want to make use of data. Microsoft wants them. If you're in the Microsoft space, Microsoft dearly wants you to use and analyze more data that you gather and collect. But yeah, it's not a free for all, and regulation is slowly catching up, I think you might say, with all the data out there in the world today. GDPR is obviously a great example of having something that has had a big impact, and I think there's a lot more to come, whether it's consumer data or more B2B kind of data that It's not a. It's not. It's not. It all has to be used carefully, and the risk is not nothing. And I think we should just mention, sorry, just that was one of three articles that Harald recently wrote for us. The other two are worth just identifying at least. One of them was just Harold's thinking on the case for building repeatable intellectual property, and an evaluation of how to set margins for software resellers. Both really outstanding pieces. If you're in the software business, well worth a read. They're all up on the site, and I'm sure we'll link to them here as well.
We've also had a couple of repeat contributions lately from Scott Hamilton. One's called Significance of Sales Lead Time for Sales Order in Manufacturers Using Microsoft Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations, which steers us a little bit away from our Business Central focus on today's podcast. Jason, could you tell me a little bit more about Scott's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to try to explain the articles. They're detailed analysis of how to use some of these features and case studies that I guess elaborate on when to use various capabilities. But it's a two-part article series on the use of sales lead time for sales orders. I know it's based out of Scott Hamilton's own work with clients in the manufacturing space, and really one of the things that you can't I guess undersell or say too much about is the fact that Scott is really focused on using the core capabilities of F&O to the max, and trying to get any scenario, trying to figure out what you can possibly do in any scenario to use those capabilities to support the business case. And so that's really where these two new articles come in. It's always great to have obviously new content from Scott. He's a longtime AX and F&O expert in the manufacturing space, and anyone who's really in that space knows that you don't want to miss his latest discoveries and latest findings.
Another really kind of a different topic that we had was by Norman Gottschalk. He's the CTO of Visionet Systems, and he takes a look at RPA, Robotic Process Automation, which is definitely a topic that's been getting quite a bit of attention lately. He takes more of a general kind of all-encompassing view of what the introduction of RPA will mean for different teams, ranging from sort of managing bots, different setups, to feeding data in to train bots, or pushing ahead with new forms of process analysis. Luckily, for anyone that's concerned about losing their job to RPA, generally the sentiment seems to be that RPA is more of a complement than a replacement for people, and that definitely seems to be a theme in Norman's article. Certainly, a lot of broad import for Dynamics users, especially with the rise of RPA systems that will tie in with Dynamics and other business applications.
Yeah, I would agree. Interesting article. RPA is continues to be a topic of high interest for our readers, and I think the points he makes are pretty good ones. I mean, RPA is really one node in the larger sort of automation debate that our society is sort of getting into, and it's interesting to. I think it's interesting to take his perspective on sort of where the sort of what will change, but not necessarily what will be lost, or maybe what will be lost or gained, or just shifted when with this particular type of technology, this RPA type of technology. I think sitting in on a couple of presentations in the last couple of months, I get the sense that it's something that's still in the early days for a lot of companies that use like a Dynamics business solution. But I think more and more companies will be taking a look at how to, implement RPA style automation in the context of the things that their workers do today. And it's, to some extent, it's probably inevitable. I think where it actually lands in each company is going to vary.
Another kind of similar topic that we heard about, again, looking ahead to some new technology that's here today, but certainly making itself known in different sections of the industry, is a piece by Wim Geukens, Managing Director of Veripark Europe, who wrote about omnichannel banking projects. And I won't get into all of the details of his piece, but a few of the interesting things that he touched on were offering a rich channel sort of coverage to engage more with your customers, as well as preparing more for open API architecture. As he writes, he says, the possibilities created by mixing up APIs, financial data, and other tech are endless. And I recommend checking out that article if you want to learn more about maximizing Dynamics 365 licenses and just about Omnichannel in general, particularly in the context of finance.
Yeah, I would just add, I really enjoy reading about this so-called Omnichannel in the context of an industry. It just makes it a lot more palatable for me personally, because I think it's a tough term to really, use in anything more than the broadest sort of headlines. But when you actually bring it down to the level of a type of business and or at least a type of industry, at least an industry in particular, you can talk more specifics and I think have a more meaningful discussion.
Finally, we also had a really great article by Magnus Gether Sørensen, an XRM developer based, I believe, in Denmark. And he has been wading into this debate about the future of Dynamics 365 customer engagement, particularly the role of flow. Now, this seems to be generating quite a bit of discussion, at least in an inside baseball kind of way, among developers. And he takes the view, and I won't do justice to it in the short form, but I again recommend that anyone interested in this topic read more of his article. But he touches on the future of flow and suggests that the effort to make many or perhaps even all processes managed through flow may be risky and harder to correct than traditional sort of development models.
Yeah, I was amazed at the sort of the healthy debate, I guess you would call it, that was going on on Twitter in response to this piece. Boy, a lot of different opinions out there right now about what the role of real DevOps, or I guess you would call it traditional DevOps, with coding, your own customizations for customer engagement type of product versus using Flow to support a lot of it, things that you wouldn't have maybe been able to do before with a lower code type of tool like that. And opinions just all over the place. I think like you, I don't want to wade too far into it. I'm not a developer, and so I can't really take a side. But seems pretty clear that it really, a lot of it depends on where you are coming from. You as a professional in this space, if you are a real DevOps expert and working for the kind of company that benefits from sort of maintaining their own code base and of customizations and sort of the skills and the DevOps sort of framework within the company to manage all of that. I think that's still a strong case, but I think there's also now this very, very strong case when you see some consultants, some customers of D365 saying, we just use Flow now and it's working for us, and that's probably great too. So I think, he asks that question in his article. When do we use flows? Do we always have to use them? Should we go back to native workflow? Should we keep on with our custom development? So I don't think it's the last we've heard of this. I think there's a lot, much like the Business Central space, there's a lot of passionate developers out there and technical architects and so forth in the customer engagement space, the CRM product line that are thinking hard about this too. And that's probably a good piece to wrap things up on. Wouldn't you say, Eamon?
I'll say. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Jason.
Always fun to review some of these things that have been going on. So thanks again for joining us. Eamon, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure as always.
Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.